Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Talking Logistics, and Happy New Year. Happy 2013. Hopefully, everyone had a fun and relaxing vacation. I know for me, it was a lot of fun, but also very short. But it's back to the grind and back to thinking and talking and analyzing what's happening in the supply chain logistics industry. And I'm glad you can join us today. For those of you who didn't attend our first episode, which was back before the holidays, where I talked about my predictions for 2013, just a quick overview of the platform here, which is I'm still getting used to and learning, which is part of the reason why I scheduled today's session, because it's also an opportunity for me to continue to get used to this platform. But if you want to submit a question, I believe you have to be registered. So if you joined in as a guest, I think when you try to submit a question via the submit question button or via the chat feature, you may be asked, to log in or put in your name and email and that information. If you're on Twitter or Facebook and you want to share what's going on with this Spreecast, you can see tabs up on the top. Where you can tweet and share right from the platform. So really, what I'm going to do today, what Talking Logistics is all about, is really it's going to be a weekly online video talk show, and in future episodes, the plan is to have guests on where I will be interviewing them on a variety of different topics. In fact, our first, what I would consider my first real episode, will be next week, where we'll have our Kate Natasic and Carl Manroth coming on and talking about their new book, recently published, on Vested Outsourcing. So here's my handy copy. So hopefully you can join us. Mark your calendar for next Thursday at noon. In fact, you should go to your calendar right now and just block every Thursday for the rest of the year, Thursdays at noon Eastern. Because just about every Thursday we're going to have an episode. We're going to have, for most Thursdays, we're going to have guests. And if not, it's just going to be me kind of leading a conversation on a topic of interest, something that's happening, some breaking news, or, something related to what I've written about in my blog. But today it's just going to be me, no host, no guest. Maybe you might think there's no host here either. But I'm going to be talking about supply chain risk management, which is the topic I wrote about on the blog yesterday on Logistics Viewpoints. So if you haven't had a chance to read that, go ahead and check it out. I'm not going to really rehash, what I wrote about there, but I did want to take some time to kind of drill a little bit into a few of the thoughts that I discussed in that posting, and certainly be able to take your questions or comments if you've got some thoughts on it. When I look at supply chain risk management, it's one of these topics where actually when I put my predictions for 2013, and I came up with a long list, which I eventually narrowed down to 8 predictions, but supply chain risk management was on the list. And I decided not to put it on this year, mainly because I had already put it on the year before and had put it on in previous years. And I think it's really a topic that continues to be on the forefront of a lot of executives, although I still don't see as much action as I would expect it there to be. For some reason, it's one of these things where a lot of companies react when there's some kind of disruption, and there's a lot of buzz and talk, but then people quickly forget. And I know when I talk to a lot of supply chain executives, it's something that's kind of fuzzy. Yeah, we think about risk. We have some discussions on it, but if I really try to peel back the onion, there doesn't seem to be any kind of firm processes or any kind of organization around risk management. So really, I'm going to talk about 3 things today, things to think about, and perhaps will spark some questions. Again, as I'm talking here, if you've got some thoughts, if you've got some questions, feel free to ask them via the Submit a Question button or via the chat feature. So let me put up on the screen, kind of the first thought that I have here. And that is that I believe that companies really need to make discussions of risk as common and instinctual as discussions of cost and service. Now, this is a thought that, this is one of my key takeaways from this past summer. Adelante, my company, put together an executive conference, and one of the sessions that we had on there was on risk management. And that session was led by Edward Erickson over at Intrapoint, and he used to be involved with supply chain risk management over at Cisco. So he gave a great presentation, led a great discussion on the topic. And one of the things he said was, look, when we talk about supply chain, discussions about supply chain typically revolve around cost and service. And that's just natural. Any kind of conversation you have around supply chain, it's about the trade-offs between cost and service. And we still haven't gotten to the point where discussions about risk are as common or as instinctual as discussions about cost and service. And I don't know why that is. Again, I think that, companies do have talk about risk perhaps at the corporate level. But when it comes down to supply chain and down at the supply chain level, it's still something that's more, you almost have to make an effort at it, or it's something that perhaps, certain segments think about it. Maybe supply managers might be thinking about risk when they're doing a supplier evaluation. But then after that initial evaluation, the processes thereafter around risk are a little bit fuzzier. One of the things I decided to do as I was thinking about this was kind of look at the definition of supply chain management. And I think if you look at the definitions of supply chain management, it's one of those areas where, you don't see, risk really, coming to the forefront. So I looked at the CSCMP website and I read the definition there. And again, no mention of risk. And then I went and I pulled up one of the books that I reference a lot, particularly when I was teaching, Designing and Managing the Supply Chain by David Simche-Levy, Philip Kaminsky, and Edith Simche-Levy. This is a great book, by the way. If you're a student, excellent book. If you're just need a great reference, it really provides a good foundation on supply chain management. I highly recommend this book. But right here on page 1, they kind of define what supply chain management is. I'm just going to read it to you just to illustrate my point. But what exactly is supply chain management? We define it as follows. Supply chain management is a set of approaches utilized to efficiently integrate suppliers, manufacturers, warehouses, and stores so that merchandise is produced and distributed at the right quantities, to the right locations, and at the right time in order to minimize system-wide costs while satisfying service level requirements. Great definition. I think it's one that all of us can embrace, but nowhere in there is risk. And I think, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we have to rethink the definition of supply chain management, because as I look at supply chain management, more and more, I equate it with risk management. And nowhere in that definition, nowhere in the definitions that we have used historically defining supply chain management, do you find the word risk in there. So I think that's something to think about and something to consider moving forward. I think that will be something that will help kind of elevate risk in the minds of supply chain professionals. The second point that I want to bring up is the importance of thinking of supply chain risk management as a program, not as a project. And this was something, again, that I had a conversation with John J. Brown, who's the director of risk management at Coca-Cola. Actually, you could find that video discussion with him at the Talking Logistics website. And, one of the things that he said that a lot of companies struggle with when it comes to risk management is kind of keeping it alive. For many companies, risk management tends to be a reactionary process. Some disruption occurs, whether it's due to a natural disaster or a supplier going out of business or something similar, and immediately, companies become reactionary. They say, okay, how are we going to overcome this challenge? They may put a team together to figure out what happened, and then put some processes in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. Or if it does happen, what are the standard operating procedures to, address a similar situation. And then, they put that in a binder, they put that up on the shelf, the team gets disbanded, and again, it collects dust, and, it's on to the next disruption that occurs. And that's really not the right approach to take. It really has to be something that is part of the DNA of the company. It's something that is ongoing, has to be ongoing. Again, so thinking about it more as a program as opposed to a set of reactionary projects that have defined start and end date. So I think until we get to that mode where risk management really is something that companies embed as part of their DNA and is something that is something that companies continue to look at and assess the different risks out there on an ongoing basis. I think you're going to get into that. Unless you do that, you're going to be in this kind of reactionary mode, start and stop, start and stop. The other thing I thought was interesting is that in terms of the assessment of the risk, and I think if you look at the environment today out there, there's arguably more risks today than there were in the past. And it's just much more dynamic, much more fast-paced, which I think, underscores the importance of really making this something that's a program, something that's ongoing as opposed to, project-based. And then finally, my last, thought that I wanted to put on is that, who owns supply chain risk management? At your company. A lot of companies that I talk to, I said, do you have a chief supply chain risk officer or VP or director of supply chain risk management? And that's a role that, many companies still don't have. And, the responsibility may fall on the, VP or senior VP of supply chain. Risk assessment might be part of that. It might be a higher level corporate function where they're looking at all sorts of corporate risk and business continuity, and supply chain might be a sliver of that. But I think that's a question companies need to ask: is who owns supply chain risk management at your company? And some of the kind of the best practices that I've seen is not necessarily a single individual, but it's really a team that's put together that meets on an ongoing basis. It's cross-functional in nature, and has some set of processes well-defined, governance structure in place to really assess risk and continuously update and create response plans in response to different emerging risks. The other component is that you have the right people with the right skills, and this is the area that I kind of highlighted in the blog yesterday, which was a blog posting by Carlos Alvarenga in HBR blog, where he talked about the importance of quants and kind of the skills that people have in the financial industry, in the insurance industry, where things like hedging and things of that nature are really important when it comes to supply chain risk management. Yet a lot of supply chain risk managers don't have that kind of skill set, that kind of knowledge. And so he made the argument in that in his blog post, in which I agree, is that companies really need to think about the skill set required in terms of managing risk when it comes to supply chain risk management. So really, those were my thoughts. Certainly, if you've got some questions or ideas, I would welcome them. And I see we've got some questions here. Jim, asked a question in terms of how would I define a program versus a project. Again, I think a program I would view it as something that is ongoing, continuous. There's a defined team. It's something that has some defined, processes around. Whereas a project is something that tends to be reactionary. Hurricane Sandy, right? And maybe you had some disruption related to that, or Katrina, or the Japan earthquake, or maybe the supplier goes out of business, and it's like, all of a sudden it affects your business, and you say we need to put a team in place to figure out, why this happened and how we can prevent it in the future. It becomes a 3-month thing. A number of people come together to kind of do the assessment on that particular incident and put together an action plan to prevent it in the future. And then again, there's kind of an end date to it where there's a report written, some processes defined, put in a binder, and then everyone goes off and it's kind of almost forgotten about it. So that's the way I would differentiate the two. Let me see. I also believe. Let's see. Let me ask the question here. Let me put up on the screen. It says, I also believe supply chain managers is also risk manager. I have not seen how companies can be proactive about risk management through risk assessment or scoring. Has anyone seen programs where companies proactively score risk and put contingency plans? I can't read the rest of it there. I think perhaps the company that I've seen do the best job at this is Cisco. And they really defined and had they have a team in place. They have some very well-defined processes in place around this. And in fact, even on the technology side, I think one of the things that I think has been lacking for a long time is that there's been a lack of technology tools to actually help companies do this in a systematic way, to be able to quantify this, be able to automate perhaps some of the processes. And really over the past couple of years, I've seen some technology companies, some startups come to market really focusing on this area, which I would consider to be kind of a white space in the supply chain software industry, where kind of the traditional players really don't have a focused solution in this. One of the companies that I've come across is a company called Rethininking. I had the opportunity to speak to their founder about a year and a half ago. She actually came out of Cisco with the risk management team. And so I think she comes at it from some frontline experience, and now she kind of realized that one of the things missing was some technology there to help companies do this. Jim Matcham here says that Cardinal Health does a great job with supply chain management risk as well. So I think on the blog I highlighted a report by the Supply Chain Risk Management Leadership Council. I believe that's the right name. It's a group of companies that have come together to define some best practices around that. So if you look at the companies that are involved in that organization, I would say those tend to be the companies that are kind of leading the way in helping to define some best practices, some leading practices in this area, and kind of help other, which companies can then use as a framework for moving forward on their own. Let's see, some of the questions here. Jim mentioned that's Cisco with a C, CISCO, the technology company versus the food company. Let me ask another question here. Does anyone know what is ISO 31000? I've heard that it is a main framework for how companies can structure a risk management program. Yes, I am. I'm not overly familiar with it, but it is again one of those standards that's out there that companies can use as a framework or a starting point to put together their risk management program. As I mentioned in my blog yesterday, there's a lot of great information and resources out there, a lot of case studies. Again, this ISO standard, the Supply Chain Risk Management Leadership Council, a number of books. One of the books that I highly recommend is The Resilient Enterprise by Yossi Sheffi. Again, some great resources and case studies in there to provide frameworks. The point I was making in the blog posting yesterday is, number one, that you should, if you haven't been thinking about risk management or have failed to walk the talk in the past, as we get started in 2013 here, now might be a good time to, start thinking about it again, and rather than being reactionary, being proactive. And secondly, is to really to think a little bit different about it. And in the areas that I kind of highlighted was particularly around the skill set, which I already talked about, as a way to do that. Let's see, any other questions or thoughts here? Yeah, so Jim made a comment here. Great point, risk versus resiliency. This might be better language that can get folks aligned with it more quickly. Again, I think, one of the things that when I talked to John J. Brown at Coca-Cola, he said, if you ask 10 people what is supply chain risk management, you're going to get, 12 different answers. And, for some companies, for some folks, supply chain risk management is really just supplier, right? It's things on the front end, in terms of making sure you don't have any disruption of supply. For other companies, much more broader, like it is at Coca-Cola, where they think about not only from, at the very beginning of the supply chain, but through all the way delivering product to the customers and beyond, right? So again, and you've got different terms like resiliency come into place. The reality is that there's a lot of things that could potentially disrupt your operations, and there are a lot of factors that companies really need to be thinking about on an ongoing basis. And it's really about, do we have the processes in place? Are we integrating discussions of risk into our conversations as much as we ought to? And if not, why not? And why should we? Let's see. Any other questions here? So I think with that, I'm going to wrap it up. So we've been about 21 minutes. Hopefully this has been a good discussion. Again, the point of these talking logistics episodes is really to drive conversation around a topic, get some ideas going, and really engage all of you to participate in the conversations. So certainly we look forward to having you join us in future episodes as we have some guests come on board. And as always, we welcome your feedback and your thoughts in terms of, number one, guests that you'd like to see on the program. Number two, how we can make these episodes more informative and more meaningful for you. So again, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Thank you for the great questions and comments, and hopefully you'll be able to make it next week for our conversation with Kate Fantastic and Carl Manroad on vested outsourcing. Again, make it a point to schedule every Thursday at noon to check out who we have on and what the topic of conversation is, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode. Thank you very much.